The Santoku, easily one of the most recognizable knife shapes in the world today. The shape was originally developed around the 1950s in Japan, but has since been copied by knife makers around the world, and for good reason. This knife is perfect for home cooks. It comes in a little bit shorter than your average 8-inch chef's knife, making it a little easier to wield and less intimidating. The word itself, Santoku, translates to 3 virtues, which refers to slicing, dicing, and chopping, or meat, fish, and vegetables, depending on who you ask. Basically, the name tries to imply the extreme versatility of the knife, again, contributing to its extreme popularity around the world. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to use one of these Santoku, give you some tips and tricks that I've picked up through my decades-long career working in some of the best kitchens in the world. But first, before we get into any chopping, we need to set ourselves up for success. So, what we need on our station before we start chopping is first and foremost a damp towel to keep our board and our knife wiped down, clean and dry. Now with a stainless steel knife like this guy, not as important as when we're using a carbon steel knife, because if not wiped down immediately after use, a carbon steel knife will rust or discolor. A stainless steel knife is going to be much easier to maintain for us. So in today's video, I'm not going to have to worry too much about wiping this down, but good habit to get into. Next, we need to make sure we have a cutting board that is stationary. So if you don't have these handy dandy little rubber feet on the bottom of your board, I would recommend putting a damp paper towel underneath your board, keep everything from sliding around. Next, we need to make sure we have the proper receptacles to put all of our chopped vegetables into. This can be something as simple as just a couple Tupperwares, one for your waste and one for your finished processed vegetables. This is very important, especially in the professional kitchen setting, because as I'm sure you've been told by many chefs, your cutting board is not a storage device, it is used for chopping only. Last thing we'll talk about before we start chopping is how to properly grip your knife. Now in culinary school, you're taught to use what's called a pinch grip. You find the pinch grip by finding the balance point in your knife, which is the point where you can use one finger to hold your knife without it falling out of your hand. Your thumb is going to grab the knife on the opposite side from your index finger, and your 3 remaining fingers are going to wrap around the handle. This grip is going to give us the most control over the knife and therefore will be the safest. The closer our hand is to the tip of the knife here, the more control we'll have over that part of the knife and the less chance we have of chopping off one of our fingers. Now it should be noted that the pinch grip is said to be like the only way to hold a knife, and I don't totally agree with this because there are circumstances where I would use my index finger on the spine of the knife, for instance when I'm slicing, and again, the closer we have a digit to the tip of our knife, the more control we're going to have over it. So in a slicing scenario, it's totally appropriate to have your index finger extended over the spine of the knife. Again, when we're slicing, you'll notice that the pinch grip is going to eat up a lot of the blade that we have available to us. So in a slicing scenario, again, it might be advantageous to grip down a little bit on the handle here, which is going to allow you to use more of the blade. But of course, the further back our hand is, the less control we're going to have over the knife. Good point now to talk about the profile of the knife. That you'll notice on a Santoku is quite flat. This means that we're going to use the knife primarily in more of like an up and down, push or pull chopping motion, but we can certainly still rock with the Santoku. Again, slicing, dicing and chopping, this knife is super versatile. You can use it for many different things. So without any more ado, let's get into chopping some stuff. I'm going to start off with just a regular old onion. I personally believe that the onion is the best thing to practice your knife skills on, so that's where we're going to start today. And I'll also talk a little bit about what we're going to do with our left hand here. So I feel like the claw grip doesn't get explained properly in a lot of knife skills videos. You're not so much making a claw just for the purpose of making a claw motion. You're making a claw because you're tucking all of your fingers in, making sure that when you are chopping, you're not going to chop a finger off. But more specifically, we're really using me personally, I use the middle finger and I use the fleshy part between my 2 knuckles here as my sort of guide to move my knife up and down. It's really important to get comfortable with this feeling because that's going to help you be more precise. Really what this is aiming where you want the knife to go, and then your right hand is simply moving the knife up and down, forward and backwards. So let's put that into practice with our onion here. I'm going to get myself all set up here. I'm going to let the vegetable just kind of find a natural spot that it likes to rest. Circular vegetables or round vegetables are tough, so we're going to make a flat spot here. I'm going to use my middle finger to to show where I want the knife to go. And then I'm going to start all the way at the tip of the knife, and I'm going to think more about pushing the knife away from myself, trying to utilize the whole length of the edge. I feel like that's another thing that doesn't get talked about enough. When we're using a knife, it's important not to just push it straight down through the ingredient, but rather let the knife do the work for us by using the whole length of it. So again, when I'm doing my second cut here, and I'm gonna leave the root on because I'm gonna show you guys how to dice it up first, and then I'll show you a julienne after. So I'm gonna leave the root on so the onion stays together. Again, I'm gonna use my claw grip. I'm gonna start at the tip of the knife, and I'm going to push it away from myself and let the knife just kind of move through the onion on its own. Next, of course, we gotta peel this guy up, making sure we get rid of any gross yellow parts on the inside. Those are no good. Okay, we've got our onion peeled here. I'm just gonna show you a quick small dice on this guy. So again, we're going to use our claw grip. We're going to use our middle finger if that's what you feel comfortable using. Whatever finger you wanna use as your guide finger, doesn't really matter. A lot of people use their index finger as well. We're gonna use the tip of our knife here, and we're going to just make incisions like this, pulling the knife sort of. You'll notice I'm pulling the knife towards myself again, because I'm trying to use as much of the blade as I possibly can. When you're just using the tip, it can be a little tough, obviously, because there's not a ton of knife there to utilize, but we're gonna get as much forward and backward motion as we possibly can. And we need to make sure that our slices here are as consistent as possible. You want them the same width apart so that when we cut across, we end up with the same size pieces. We're also going to make sure our incisions come as close to the root end of the onion as possible. This is going to help us avoid any of those sort of stuck together pieces, again, when we're doing our horizontal cut. So I'm going to come all the way here. Now, this is a topic of hot debate here. Some guys like to do the horizontal cut. Some people prefer not to. In my experience, when you're coming through the onion like so, you're gonna end up on this side not making as nice a cut on this section here as you would on the other side here. See how I've got that big fat part there? I didn't do a good job on that, but on this side, it's nice all the way down, right? So what that horizontal cut does, in my experience, is help you just separate that part of the onion where I didn't do a good job coming all the way through, and making sure that when we cut it, we get nice consistently sized pieces. Okay, now for the fun part, we're actually going to dice our onion. So again, claw grip. My thumb and my pinky finger are kind of keeping things together, but making sure I keep those two fingers behind my middle finger, because if I don't, I risk chopping my fingers off. Again, I'm going to use my middle finger as my guide, and I'm going to start as close to the tip of the knife as possible, pushing away from myself and slightly pushing down as I do so. And look at that, beautiful, beautiful small dice. So now we've got our root end. Hopefully you don't have too much of your root end left over. What you can do now is tilt your onion down like so, and then do what we did before and just put some more incisions in like so. And we can continue dicing our onion to the point where hopefully we have little to no waste left over. Ideally what we're looking for here is a tiny little nub just like that. That's all we want. That root's not fun to eat. It's not great in stocks either because it's bitter, so you're just gonna toss that into your waste receptacle. Now, huge point here to keeping your knife nice and sharp over the long term is not scraping it across the board. So rather than using our edge to scrape the onions together, we're going to flip it over and use the spine of our knife. Scrape things together. Works just as well and keeps our knife sharp for much longer. Now I'm going to transfer all of my stuff into my receptacle here because again, our board is for chopping, it is not for storage. And of course, I'm going to use my damp towel now to wipe my knife clean and wipe my board clean. And you'll see how important that is now because we're set and ready to chop our next half of the onion here, which I'm going to show you a julienne on. So when we started with our onion, we did a dice utilizing the tip of our knife and then using the sort of flat spot on our knife. Now we're just gonna purely use that flat spot on our knife to do an up and down chopping motion. Again, this is where the pinch grip is really important. And you'll notice that I kind of use like a different style of pinch grip. I prefer to keep my index finger sort of like close to the edge of the knife, and this is gonna kind of act like I can kind of tell where my knife is gonna end because I've got my finger right there. So this is gonna help me with knowing how far down I need to chop. We want to cut all the way through the onion, of course, but we don't want to be like slamming our knife into the cutting board because that's going to cause it to dull faster or even chip, which is obviously not so good. Again, we're going to use our claw grip using our middle finger as our guide. And we want to be really nice and loose in the wrist here. If you've ever played the drums before, it's kind of like you're kind of using that motion. So your wrist is kind of doing the work for you. Through this motion, we're gonna try to get, again, as much of the blade length in there as possible, which is gonna help us cut more easily. And yeah, we're just gonna go for it. So. So I'm about just over halfway now, and going up the onion mountain is always easy. Coming down the other side is both hard and dangerous. Not something I would recommend you do, nor would I recommend doing what I just did there, scraping my knife across the board. So what we're gonna do is just tip this guy over to the other way, and now we can go uphill again. So as you improve, you'll get better and faster at that. I still end up with a little piece at the very end that I can't really use. So in today's video, I'll just throw that in our waste bin, but normally I would save that in my stockpile, maybe throw it in the freezer with some other frozen vegetables and make a veggie stock or chicken stock out of it in the future. But this is our julienne onion here, nice and thin. Look at that. Sharp knife is super important to good knife skills, so there you have it, the onion, both diced and julienne. So we got a bit of a sense of what the tip on a Santoku can do for us, but I'm gonna show you just how awesome the tip on a Santoku really is by brunoise garlic. Brunoising some garlic? Whatever, however you say it. So first I'm gonna chop this guy in half. This is gonna make it much easier to work with. I've got a flat spot on both sides now, so I don't have to worry about the vegetable rolling around. And again, using my middle finger as my guide, I'm gonna put in some nice little incisions here. Again, I'm trying to get as close to the end of this piece of garlic as I possibly can without going all the way through so that it stays together. Side one done. Side two done. Very similar to what we did with the onion, just a little horizontal cut there for us. Another little horizontal cut. And now we can cut across our garlic. And look at that, super beautiful, nice fine garlic. This is perfect for making like beurre blancs and stuff like that, butter sauces for pasta, because, or in like a risotto for instance, because your garlic will just kind of melt away if you get it nice and small like this. All right guys, so there's garlic and onions done. Two of my favorite things to chop. Next we'll go into some basil, and I'll show you a chiffonade. This is gonna show off the versatility of the knife in regards to the rocking motion that you're able to achieve with the Santoku. So I've got some basil here that we're gonna do a little chiffonade on, which is just kind of like little thin strips of herbs or any leafy green for that matter. So you could like do a chiffonade of kale, of romaine, of basil, of mint. Basically any leafy green you can turn into a chiffonade. And what we're gonna do here is layer some leaves here. It's easiest if you layer the large leaves on the bottom and then put the smaller ones on the inside. So you just use the nice ones here for the video. So I got my layer of basil here. So now what I'm gonna do is just turn this into like a little cigar. So I'm going to gently roll my basil up. Basil is very, very delicate, so it's very important to be gentle with your basil as you're rolling it up. And it's also extremely important to use a super sharp knife, because if we use a dull knife, we're just gonna bruise it and it's gonna turn brown in like 2 seconds. So another reason why a sharp knife is super important. Again, this may be getting a little repetitive for you guys, but I'm using my index or my thumb and pinky finger to keep my little cigar together. And then I'm using my middle finger as my guide. I'm going to use my my pinch grip for this, and I'm going to rock with my knife just like so. Kind of following the natural curve or belly or profile of the knife to sort of dictate what my stroke looks like. But again, you'll notice I'm trying to use the whole length of the blade. I'm trying to use like nice long strokes when I'm chopping. And I'm taking my time, I'm just slowly moving my fingers back. It's helping me get nice, precise, consistent strips of basil here. And we'll stop towards the stems here and just get rid of those. Again, wipe our knife down immediately after use. And if we want to move our ingredients around, using the spine of our knife to do so rather than the edge. And what we should end up with are these nice little strands of basil. Beautiful. This knife is crazy sharp. It is so much fun to use. A sharp knife is going to make your life so much easier in the kitchen. Again, cleaning up here, keeping ourselves nice and tight. What should we do next, Hansan? We've shown the rocking motion, we've shown the tip, we've shown the up and down chopping motion. Let's just go into squash. I would love to do squash because I find a lot of people think that they can't cut one of these with a Japanese knife. Okay. Next vegetable we're cutting up is a butternut squash. This is one that a lot of people think cannot be cut with a Japanese knife. And though it can be a little bit scary cutting such a hard vegetable with such a sharp and thin knife, it is certainly still possible as long as you're using your knife in the correct way. So what we need to do, obviously, is take the top of the squash off. We've got a sort of part in here that's gonna be all just vegetable, and then in the bulbous bottom part here we're gonna have like a cavernous part similar to like a pumpkin where there's a bunch of like guts and stuff in there. So we're just gonna take the top off, we're gonna cut it right about here where the bulbous part starts and where the gross inside part is, and we're gonna cut that away, and then we're gonna have our nice cylinder here. So let's no more talking. Find a way that the vegetable just kind of gently falls on the cutting board without rolling around. Oh. There we go. And again, using our claw grip, we're going to cut into this squash. So, easy peasy, right? You'll notice I just went straight forward and backwards, straight up and down. Where you're gonna run into issues with any Japanese knife, whether you're cutting a squash or whether you're cutting herbs, is twisting the board. And I'm not gonna do it because I can't bring myself to do it, but twisting your knife on the board like so is really, really bad for the knife. And then twisting the knife in the ingredient is really, really bad for the knife as well. But as long as we're going straight forward and backwards, straight up and down, we should have no issues. So again, I've gotten a little bit into the inside part there, which is no big deal, but we've got our two sections of squash here. Again, we want to cut this part off, so I'll get rid of that. Cut this guy in half. And this part you would scoop out with a spoon, and then you could dice this up. But for our video today, I just want to show you how nice and sharp this knife is and how easily we can cut hard vegetables with it. So we'll just take the outer skin right off of this guy, no problem. And again, you'll notice I'm just going straight forward and backwards, straight up and down, no twisting motion whatsoever. And if you follow those guidelines, you'll have no issues cutting harder ingredients like this. I would typically use a peeler to cut or to peel my squash, not with my knife, but that just goes to show you how sharp this knife really is. Super, super easy. wiping ourselves down. And then I'll just show you real quick. You can use all sorts of different motions when you're cutting with a Santoku. You can use that push motion forward. You can start towards the heel and pull towards yourself. Doesn't really matter. Me personally, I feel more comfortable using the pushing motion like so. Stack these guys up. This guy's a little fat, so what we can do here is rather than stand it up like this and try to cut into it, very precarious because it's going to kind of fall from one side to the other. So what we'll do is we'll just lay it down like this and we'll just essentially like fillet our squash now. Or at least get it started that way and then cut all the way through. Cool. And now we need to create our little planks. So this is a good time to talk about where the Santoku is a little bit limited, obviously. So with a big vegetable like a squash, we've got a lot of vegetable to get ourselves through, obviously, and it can become a little bit too much for the Santoku to handle. Obviously, this is sort of a smaller squash, and I'm making pretty good work of it with this Santoku here. So just goes to show you how versatile they really are. But you will notice a slightly easier time using a larger knife like a gyuto if you're cutting a lot of larger vegetables like squash. And again, whenever I'm making a cut, trying to use as much of the knife as I possibly can. You don't want to just force the knife straight down like so. Obviously it still cuts, but it's certainly not the same feeling as when I'm using a longer stroke, pushing the knife through the ingredient like so. Look at that. Squash is one of the tougher things to cut in the world there, so making easy work of a squash sure feels good. All right, so the last thing I'm going to show you guys with the Santoku here is the meat portion of the meat, fish, and vegetables. Or I guess I should say the fish part of the meat, fish, and vegetables. But we can kind of get an idea of how it perform on meat by going through fish here as well. So I've got a piece of salmon here. The Santoku's great at just kind of cleaning things up. So if this guy looks pretty good, but if I had some pieces, you know, off of this side here that I didn't like, I can use these nice long strokes to get any like little, you know, imperfect parts off. Any parts of plastic that may be stuck on there. We can also use the Santoku to fillet or take the skin off of our salmon. So to do so, you would just come into the tail part here, turn our knife around, getting underneath there, and then we're going to grab this piece of skin over here that we've created. That's going to help us guide the knife through. I like to use a towel here to grab onto my skin, which is going to make it easier for us to go through. And hopefully what we're left with is very little flesh left on our piece of skin here. Didn't do a great job up here, but... And now making sure our knife stays wiped down, clean and dry at all times. Now we can slice this guy up. So this is where the Santoku again is kind of lacking a little bit. If you were slicing a larger piece of fish or any larger piece of meat, the Santoku might feel a little bit inadequate for this type of stuff. But if we're just slicing up like a small piece of salmon like so, we're gonna have no trouble. Again, like I touched on at the beginning of the video, if we're using our pinch grip at this point, we're not gonna have a ton of blade to work with here. It might be a little weird. So what I like to do is just choke down on my handle a little bit, extend my index finger onto the spine of the knife, And again, try to utilize the whole length of the blade. I'm not slicing the salmon in any particular way. I don't know what I would use salmon that's been sliced like this for, but just to show you guys just how sharp this knife is and what you can use the Santoku for. So there you have it, guys. The Santoku really is the perfect knife for the home cook. Just looking for something versatile, all-purpose that they can use for pretty much anything that they're going to come across in the kitchen. Being a little bit shorter, it's geared perfectly towards that home cook because it's less intimidating and easier to use. And though it is a little bit limited, especially when you're getting into the larger vegetables or larger slicing tasks, there's a whole lot of stuff that can be achieved with one of these Santoku. So if you're a home cook just looking for your first knife that you can do everything with, grab yourself a Santoku.